Hello, fortune seekers. The older you get, the more likely you are to divide your one lifetime into many discrete lives you have lived. For Danny and I, one of those lives was as aspiring filmmakers of the indie variety. We had many projects started and a couple finished. Mistakes were consumed, lessons were digested, and now we wish to pass what we would like to market as wisdom on to you in the first installment of an ongoing series titled Filmmaker Foibles. On today's episode of the Moth Studios Super Secret Podcast. Shh. Welcome back to the show. As always, I am your host, crisis planner who minds his manners, Joel Watts. As always, joined by...
Danny, confused as usual.
So this is a very special episode coming to you out of chronological order of our normal feed. So if you would like to learn more about that normal feed, please look in your podcatcher app or the YouTube playlist that you are on. Take a step back a week, 2 weeks, however long far back. We have plenty of topics for you to discover there.
3 weeks?
Why not 4?
I don't know if we've been doing the podcast.
I'm pretty sure we have, actually. I think you could...
Who knows? We don't even know when this episode is.
That's true. What? Hey, audience, why don't you tell us in the comments, how many episodes can you go back at this point? Scroll all the way down, count them up, and tell us. We know you're watching.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I'm sure that will be an interesting comment section with lots of numbers.
Lots of numbers that we could do ourselves. Yeah. What's your idea, Danny? Do you have a game?
We're going to put a picture. We'll find a picture with a jar of M&Ms on it. Tell us how many M&Ms are in this jar. Put the number in the comments. Really, there's no way of knowing because it's a picture. We can't count them, but it will be fun to put a random number in the comment that corresponds to what you think is in that jar of M&Ms.
And whatever we feel is the correct answer, we might give you a like if we feel like you got something like the correct answer. If it feels right.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. And if it feels wrong, we'll delete your comment. Because we're vindictive like that. Not really. I mean, we really want all the comments there that we can get. So please comment how many M&Ms you think are in the jar.
Your comments can hurt us and we'll take it. We're punished.
Absolutely.
We're all for the punishment, just for the attention.
We're gluttons for punishment.
Anyways, so...
punish me, Joel.
Well, I'm going to punish you with this one, Danny. I usually do a question of the week to get the show started, get the audience to know us better. Now, this is an odd week because we're recording this episode just in case something bad enough happens that we can't record the podcast. So I have a question that's kind of like our game of the week. And possibly you might be able to check our social media feeds for the answer. So the question is... what do you predict happened that made us have to pull this episode out of the vault? And $100 to the host who gets closest without going over. I don't know where that $100 is coming from, but one of us gets it.
Ooh, $100. $100 on the line if I can guess accurately. What was the reason why we could not post this podcast? Okay, here's what I've got. I'm imagining some sort of audio issue. I would imagine that maybe we had a guest on, maybe we didn't quite get the technical check correct. Maybe they accidentally recorded the Discord call over their own audio recording, creating some sort of echo situation that we just couldn't untangle. In this future, I'm imagining that we record a lot of our podcasts on Discord, which we don't do today, but I would imagine in the future we probably would. I'm guessing this guest would probably be like some sort of really charismatic TikToker. Maybe they would have some sort of association with Disney. But I would say that's probably maybe a little too specific. But that would be my guess. I would imagine it'd be a good episode with probably one of the best something randoms of all time. And I also guess that like by that time we probably are really, really leaning into you being an edgelord. So that's my guess. But yeah, you can Venmo $100 whenever you're ready. That's all.
All right, guests. Well, fortunately, by the time you hear that offer, the reason will have already happened. By the time you hear this recording, it'll already be too late. My answer, after listening to my mother and her sister speak on family health over unlimited soup, salad, and breadsticks at the one establishment brave enough to reassure us that we are in fact family, I now am keenly aware of the fragility of all those around me. So I would say a funeral, not mine, but one that I'm intending.
Just like someone died because they ate at Olive Garden.
We all eat at Olive Garden, and we eventually die.
I do not eat at Olive Garden.
We ain't family.
Darden is a no for me. Is Olive Garden owned by Darden?
I don't know anything about the ownership of Olive Garden. If you want to look into it, are we going to just start racking up restaurants that we are at war with? We have to be nice to so many people. I would not mind being a restaurant hater.
Darden is not. Darden does own Olive Garden. And yeah, I'm not a fan of Olive Garden.
I'll say this. I don't blame you. It was our second choice after our local Italian spot, Julian's. It turns out they do that. What I would do if I owned a restaurant, which is close from the hours of like 3 until like 4:30. You know, they close their doors to customers so that they can reset. For a siesta.
Oh, for reset.
Something like that. Yeah, shift change / reset. And I'm like, that's a sign of a well-run establishment to me. If they're not trying to, take customers all hours of the day, if they know that they have that slow spot, so might as well utilize it. But, I'm a late luncher, so I got into town and we realized that if we had pulled up to Julian's, a local San Antonio place, we would not be able to get a seat and we would be those rude people. So we decided to emergency press the Olive Garden button because my mom is a fan of Olive Garden.
But it was an emergency, to be clear. It was an emergency Olive Garden situation. It wasn't a consensual, normal Olive Garden situation.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't like
consensual, but just not
I didn't go
premeditated.
Yeah, it wasn't premeditated. I'll say that. It was. Okay. It was like we all have to. Like I have a time limit. My brother has a time limit. He was going to join us. We all have to press the button of we got to go to a place now. You start thinking about those places you can just guarantee it are open, and even if they're not delivering the quality that you that they're at least going to deliver you warm food. You hope.
That's a hope. It's not necessarily a given. I've had many a cold meal at a chain restaurant. And I assume Olive Garden does the same. I wouldn't know. I don't eat there.
Well, now I'm getting kind of hungry. I can't wait to go eat after this podcast. So we should probably get to the conversation at hand so I can get to that. Ever dreamed of embarking on legendary quest, unlocking hidden secrets, and discovering untold riches? Dive into the world of X Seekers of Fortune. It's the game that's soon to be taking the internet by storm. Sign up today at xseekersoffortune.com and start your journey to greatness. Remember, fortune favors the bold. See you there. So, as I brought up in the intro, the main topic today is a series that we want to do where we talk about some of our filmmaking projects called Filmmaker Foibles. We had a solid run of at least about 7 years, maybe longer, of trying out various projects as little indie filmmakers. Most of them were short films. There was a web series in there. We're going to try to get to all of them, but we kind of wanted to start chronologically with the one that I think has the most spiritual connection to our game X Seekers of Fortune, because this is a TV show we wrote together over the course of I would say a year and a half of our time we spent developing this.
We wrote a TV show together?
Well, yeah. We're going to get to talking about it because our main topic today.
That sounds cool.
Our main topic today is the tall tale of Buda, Next 3 Exits. So first we wanted to talk a little bit about the world building. I think the best way to kick that conversation off is Danny. Who is Phil Cashdollar?
Well, that's a great question, Joel. I think Phil Cashdollar is a little bit of all of us. No, the serious answer is he's mostly a lot of you.
Like Kervin wasn't here, I would have spit in his face.
See, that's a good reason for Kervin not to be on every episode. We would The ongoing gag would be trying to get one of us to spit in his face by accident. Just catching off guard. To be clear, no one here wants to spit in Kervin's face. This is just like an accidental situation that happened. And this is going to come out as really weird because this was the last episode we recorded. Out of context, everyone's going to be like, why are they talking about this? It's fresh on our mind. I accidentally spit in Kervin's face in an episode because Joel said that he was a Genghis Khan apologist and meant every word of it. So I was just real taken aback by the brazen comment out of Joel's mouth and accidentally spritzed.
Yeah, it was definitely like
in the eye.
So if you want to go back, that should be episode 12 in the podcast. Let's see if we left it in. Maybe
Yes,
at the end.
I presume.
But that is accidentally laughing so much, or maybe being so excited that you would spit in somebody's face. That is a trait that Phil Cashdollar as a character would have.
Absolutely. I mean, so to give you the full scope of who Phil Cashdollar is, Phil Cashdollar was the main character in our TV show Buda Next Three Exits, and Phil was a high schooler who had a appetite for fun and hot dogs. And he was always getting up to some kind of hijinks that usually involve causing quite a bit of mayhem in his town and dragging along his friends who, generally speaking, were not completely aligned with his game plan. What would you add to that, Joel?
Well, I think that, like one of the favorite characters of pop culture, the Joker, Phil Cashdollar is a bit of an agent of chaos. He would do what he wanted and kind of impose, he would create problems out of things that he wanted to do, or solutions he wanted to propose for other people's problems would just create more problems. A classic sitcom character where, the story kind of builds up because of their incompetence, but their enthusiastic incompetence goes a long way. But he also had a little bit of he was a young man. He was supposed to be like a mid high schooler. So what, 15, 16 was the ideal age range for him. And our idea, I think, was that he was a bit of, even though I use the word incompetence, I don't think that's totally fair to Phil Cashdollar. He just was differently competent, if you will. And he
very differently.
Yeah.
competent.
And he would find esoteric solutions and pursue them, and they would sometimes work out. So he would almost have like the, toolkit of an action hero in that way.
One time, Will, I generated an AI image of what I think Phil Cashdollar might have looked like, and I'll put it in the file so we can show people somewhere here, there, or wherever.
Yeah. In fact, maybe that
Makes
could,
sense.
if anything goes wrong with my video recording this week, maybe we could just paste Phil Cashdollar over my video, since he is.
Yet another thing that will make no sense out of context, but let's just say we've had some technical difficulties at the time of this recording. Hopefully not in this recording.
So yeah, if you folks want to pinpoint the exact date that we're recording this episode, feel free to pull out your clues. We'll let you know with a like if you get close. Anyway.
I don't think we can talk about Phil Cashdollar without talking about his larger setting, which is the small town of Buda, which is sort of a suburb of Austin, Texas at this point. Would you say that's a fair?
Yeah, it would. At the time we wrote the show, it would have been described as a small town outside of Austin, Texas. But I think at this point, you would have to call it a suburb of Austin, Texas, because of the rapid growth of Austin, Texas. And it was really just I would say, it was a fun name that we were both inspired by. At the time I was driving up to see you often in Austin. You were living in Austin, I was living in San Antonio, and I would pass the sign, Buda. I think it's technically Buda next two exits on my way through, but I remember passing that sign and just thinking, Buda is a great name. We might as well name our town that, for various reasons. So we were just attracted to the name, but it was basically a stand-in for small town Texas in general.
And small town America, I would say. Just more with a Texas flavor, because obviously that was our backyard and we knew what to write about it. But it really was a setting for us to talk about what was going on in the world at that time, or specifically in the country. And this was circa, 2005, 2006?
Yeah, roughly. I mean, I would say that we probably really started doing a lot of the heavy lifting on it in 2006, and pushing into maybe 2007. So yeah, I think 2005 was like when we conceived of the characters that would eventually go on to populate Buda. But I would say 2006 is like when we really started to, bang that drum and start writing, banging out scripts. Yeah.
Sweet.
But I think the thing that most excites me whenever I do think back to Buda was how I would say we were both kids of the Simpsons generation. I know I'm a Simpsons super fan. I really hope to show that muscle off in the future. But to say the least, I think we both were inspired by what the Simpsons did over the course of 4 or 5 seasons, their first 4 or 5 seasons, where they started building out this town of Springfield to have all these intricate, nuanced characters who some of them starting out as just gag one-off characters who then turned into, beloved characters. We were trying to do, I guess, from the get-go with Buda. We spent a lot of time talking about all the different facets of that town as much as we could perceive them, and kind of coming up with all these little side stories, the small shops, the most powerful man in town, his team of cronies who keep him the most powerful man in town, the local churches, things like that, things that the Simpsons sort of tripped over the course of years. We were trying to install into our show nearly from the first episode. These were conversations. We would have long conversations, sending us down the different avenues and alleyways of the town. And so
the truly psychotic part of it was, again, you mentioned The Simpsons, and also South Park was a major influence. These two sort of big animated shows that did big, wild, crazy things that we wanted to do, but for whatever reason, we thought we could do them in live action. So
that is, yeah, in retrospect, that was the biggest ask. It's like, let's do this huge sprawling show, this huge sprawling story, and also hire actors to play teenagers who are going to rapidly no longer be teenagers. And
I remember one time we handed a script to, and I'm sure we'll talk about who this person is later, but we handed in a script that we had written, and her first note was like, "You think you can do this with a live bear?"
And she was probably right. We got defensive, but let's face it, she was right.
We're like, hey, there's bears. There's some very talented bears out there.
Yeah, I think
you don't know all the bears.
In having gained some experience, I think the idea that to get a bear to sit in the corner with nobody approaching it is still like everybody is on high alert. To interact with a bear is like you definitely need it's not something you should probably put 15-year-old kids in the same room with. If we actually got through that and made that episode, I'm sure we would have gotten in trouble online about having put people in those positions. But we were thinking a lot about trick photography and things like that. So we can get into the bear episode later.
There would have at least been 2 different bears, like a stunt bear and a regular bear.
But it's like one of those things. We can't pitch the entirety of Buda Next 3 Exits to you, but we can kind of get into how far we went with it to give you an idea of like what the world building was like. Now, usually, I would say to preface the statement, usually when you write a TV show, especially back then, they were starting to get into the idea of like plan out your season in advance. But I still think it was of the era that's like, you really want to have a great pilot, you want to make a great pilot, and you just hope, you have some ideas as to where you could take it. And you might have like, a binder that has all the characters' names and maybe, all the characters laid out and named, and maybe a couple ideas of like where their story could go. We were young and full of energy and full of enthusiasm about this project. We kept pushing forward further and further, and you're a big person. You're the type of person who you like to write the pages themselves in order to discover the story. So if I remember correctly, we wrote roughly, like, I would say like at least 4.5 episodes, like from start to finish. And these were not your standard length episodes. We constantly got criticism from other folks that we were pushing the limits of page count for a 30-minute show. Like we're talking.
Yeah, I think if memory serves me correctly, like episode 3 in Charitable Action was 41 pages.
41 pages. And at that time, there were people. Oh, you got something there, Danny?
Yeah, this is actually the script for Incharitable
Oh
Action.
man, I love that you keep these things. We should do it. You know what? If you folks are interested, we'll do a table read together of the script for Uncharitable Action.
I would need to reread this before committing to doing anything public with
Fair
this.
enough. We could at least maybe read a scene or two from Uncharitable Action.
I'm pretty sure we would have to bleep the title of the pilot, so I would.
Yeah. Oh.
So,
Let's say the world has changed.
it was 2005.
Yeah. And yes, internet, we should have known better, but the world has changed quite a bit since we were writing Buda Next 3 Exits. So, but yeah, we had written at least like 4.5, maybe 5 episodes of the show, and we planned out. I would say we had a solid idea of what the main storyline would be for 3 different seasons. The one we were writing plus seasons 2 and 3.
Yeah, no, we definitely had an arc that we wanted to follow the characters through. We had evolutions of the characters, evolutions for the town. And there's a lot of different commentary we wanted to touch upon. But yeah, instead we just mostly wrote 4 crazy episodes and drove one lady crazy who was kind enough to read them and give us notes and pretend it's not insane to try to do a full episode with a bear being shepherded through town by 15-year-olds.
Now we're kind of bringing up Buda Next 3 Exits, specifically to relate it to our current project, which is X Seekers of Fortune. And one of the things I think we discovered through doing this is that the two of us have a desire to build worlds. And Danny, is there any sort of like relationship between the world building that we did for Buda Next 3 Exits and what we're doing now for X Seekers of Fortune? And how do you think we've maybe learned from Buda Next 3 Exits and are becoming more successful with X Seekers of Fortune?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I mean, for as long as we've known each other, I think that we've had an affinity for big worlds, and lots of lore and myth, and I think we wanted to do that. I kind of blame Star Wars for it. I think we both grew up being massively influenced by Star Wars, Indiana Jones, other kind of series that had a lot of lore around them and a lot of extended universe, and really enjoyed getting into the pockets and really feeling like you understood all the minutia that took place on and off the screen, and really feeling like the stories weren't just stories or films that like started and ended with the runtime. The idea that there was a world much bigger that you only saw glimpses of, and maybe if you were lucky, someday you would find a way to transport yourself there and experience more of it. And I think there was that I think once you have that sort of bug, for intricate worlds and stories, like you're driven to try to make your own. Like you want to live there because that's the closest thing you're ever going to get to inhabiting a fictional world, is building your own. I think just talking last night, again, this is out of time, but last night we were doing Tuesday Night X. We talked to one of our I don't want to call her a regular, but by the time you watch this, I'm sure she will be, because she's one of the biggest players of the game. But she's running her own D&D campaign, and she was walking us through all the intricate details of her campaign. And I mean, it really resonated with me, because it's like that's the same thing we're doing. We're just doing it for a graphic novel and a card game. But yeah, I mean, I think I've got a little far off here from the original point, which is that, Buda 3 Exits was our first foray into doing it together. And I think we learned a little bit about how to approach building something big together. What do you think?
I think I could expand on what you were saying, or maybe offer what it could possibly be the lesson that I feel like might have been learned here based on what you were saying, which, what was most interesting to me, or what is most interesting to me, I do agree, is like creating a world so big that you feel like you need to go there so you can see what's around the corners. And I think what maybe we've learned is knowing how much to really focus in on what's past the corner before we say, okay, that's enough. If we go down that hallway later, we can expand on it. But for us to talk much more about it is distracting us from the places we're actually going to. It's sort of like in filmmaking itself. When you get on set, you only have so much time in a day to make your shot, make your scene. If you light and set deck an area that is not going to be shot at all, that is wasted time that you could have spent lighting and decorating a place that is in the frame. So
Yeah.
it's like knowing it's just drawing a little bit past where you're going. And it's important to still, it's like follow through. You still want to go a little bit further past where you're stopping. That way the audience can still like kind of see it fade off. But you don't need to have an answer for every single mystery all the time. And I think that's what we're learning. We'll have conversations. I think we know when, okay, this is where we're getting a little too in the weeds. Let's back up. Let's talk about, because we still have an entire story to tell, and we're doing it in such an interesting way this time. This is so different than Buda Next Three Exits, because then we had to tell a story pretty much linearly as like episodic television, and this time we're telling stories non-linearly through art on cards. We're learning a lot more, like just in us working with artists right now. And hopefully by the time you're seeing this, you have seen some of the art, or we've revealed some of the art for the cards. But now that we're working with artists and we can tell them what the story is, we're developing our characters, we're developing our scenes, our scenarios. We're not sure if every single card is going to be represented in the larger story, and the 36 cards are all going to be appearing in the larger story, but we're planning on making it happen. And that means that every time we touch on a card, we have to ask, where does this card, if it's a relic, where do they find it? Well, that ties it to a site. It's like, okay, is there any sort of, are any of the feats happening at that site? Where does this feat happen? And now we're starting to tie all the things together, and it's creating a journey. And it reminds me, this might be a little off the beaten path, but it's something I learned from how they said Tolkien did it. And a lot of the great fantasy writers, I think a lot of people have taken this lesson, because steal from the best, baby. Steal from the best. Tolkien would start by drawing his map and the path that his characters would have to take. And then he would follow that path in order to write the story. So he knew the path they had to take. Now he has to create, the situation. So I think with the way that we're doing this, we have the cards, we're laying them out in chronological order. And some of those cards are sites. So we're saying they go to this site, and then they go to this site, and then they go to this site. And that's kind of like setting up the scenes and the stages for the conflict and for the action.
Yeah, that's something that we've often talked about, which is, we often feel like we work best with some sort of creative limits. We're both very big, have very big imaginations. And with world building, like you said, you can go off on all these side roads that no one's ever going to see. And it's a complete, waste of your time. So you need a little discipline, right? And so the cards really kind of give us that box to work through. It's like, we got to tell a story that, captures these moments. So, where's the leap of faith happen? Where do the records get burnt? What is the irradiated crater? How does the excavator's pick work? All these things are questions we have to answer. And for us, I think we love that challenge. To us, that's I think music to our ears, cool. How do we get all these pieces to fit together? How do we make this puzzle work?
Well, yeah, I would definitely say music to my ears. I got to sit down just to do a little preliminary work, like starting at the beginning and here's the site the first scene takes place at. Here are the relics that would be featured at that scene. Here's the feats that creating the moments, the beats of the scene. And I worked through, I would suggest 75% of what I would imagine to be the first chapter, and that still leaves a lot more. And this is just like a bulleted list with a couple of handful of notes. This is not like full blown scene writing or anything like that. But
similar to Buda, we definitely are getting ahead of ourselves, right? We're talking about future sets and how the stories that we're telling now factor into sets down the line.
And I do apologize if sometimes I come across as the guy who's like, okay, that's awesome, but we have to come back down to reality. I'm definitely trying to live in the here and now more so, and talk about what's going on. But it is good for you to ask those questions, because we are still even debating, is this going to be a story with continuity of characters, or are we going to, much like other card games, other TCGs, every time we release a new set, it take place in a new location with different characters? And that's like an ongoing debate, and that's going to have a big impact on how this first set ends. The storyline, if these characters, if this was it for them, or they weren't, this was meant to be like their most important story, that would change how we plan future stories, and it would also change how we set up this ending. If they are meant to go on more and more on other adventures, then we need to end them in a less resolved way. So we have to make that decision.
This is another big lesson I think that we could draw from it, which is, when you're telling big stories that take place over the course of multiple seasons or movies or books or whatever, you're always writing with an eye to the future. How do you foreshadow? How do you make sure that you pay things off? How do you keep people engaged? How do you build questions and intrigue? And how do you make sure that you don't write yourself into a corner, right? And that's very similar to designing a game where you're going to have multiple expansions and rules and mechanics coming. And how do you design a game that isn't going to end up being broken as soon as you release another expansion? So I think a lot of that like forward-thinking mentality about designing games with future expansions and the need to be backwards compatible and forwards compatible, I think a lot of that we learned from world building through projects like Buda Next 3 Exits.
100% agree with that. And it is like you have to do just enough forecasting. You can go. Are you eating on the podcast?
No, I'm just very parched. Will can show the audience like a supercut of how many times.
Oh wow, yeah. Okay, I can appreciate that. We're Texans and water is 100% necessary all the time. Well, one thing that I think has allowed us to get this far ahead with confidence, though, is the fact that we're keeping this lower to the ground and as a project that we can finish. And that is probably where Buda Next 3 Exits, we can set up the fiction of the world, but we really need to delve into the reality of trying to produce it. And that's where it comes time for us to talk about working with others versus relying on others. So, Danny, just to set the scene, who did we work with to try to bring Buda Next 3 Exits to life?
Yeah, so, Buda Next 3 Exits really started as us trying to write our very first feature film, which was called V.D. Dickerson Presents, and it was about a character that was sort of a proto Phil Cash Dollar, probably also called Phil Cash Dollar, trying to do some things. So
he was trying to make a movie. We can at least say that. What kind of movie? Well, you fill in the blank.
The kind that Will would bleep a lot. So
hey, I think it's the type that would get us demonetized if we ever got monetized.
Yeah, and also the kind of thing that Joel would base a game off of and then get bleeped a lot when he was explaining it on a past podcast. So anyway, so we had a script for that. And then I think at that point, maybe we decided that we wanted to try to turn it into a TV show because we wanted to do something serial. I think we had become really inspired by serial television. And I had just like through happenstance met this guy at a coffee shop who said that he had some friends that were looking for different pilot scripts to option. They had started their production company. It was called Reversal Films. And he set up a meeting for us with these folks to, pitch them our script and see what they thought. And so we went and we met with them. And their names were Vic, Nick, and Kat. And we showed them the script. We talked about it. And they liked it enough to option it for $1. And
how did you spend that? I don't think I got my 50 cents.
I don't think I got it either. Actually, hold on. I think I still have Vic on LinkedIn. Hold on. I should ask him for $1. Hey, man, this might sound petty, but where's my buck?
Well,
you owe me $1. Can you spot
and with inflation, it's $1.75 at this point, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, honestly, like if we do a future episode, I mean, we ended off on good terms with all those guys. I think that they did their best with the script. I think they were trying to figure out where they could get things done in the market, and we were a potential opportunity, and it wasn't something they could get traction on. So, I mean, we never really got where we were going with it, but I think it was worth it, if nothing else, for the time we got to spend with Kat. I mean, she really put a lot of time and energy into giving us notes on our stories. And I honestly felt like we leveled up a lot as writers and storytellers just through working with Kat. And I hope maybe one day we can even have her on the
Yeah,
podcast.
that I think she would be a great conversation, especially to catch up with her all these years later. Now that we're, I don't think we were the worst young 20-something men, but I think we still had a lot to learn at that in that era, and we had high hopes and expectations, and I think we had that optimism that comes with being young and naive, and well, that we can get into exactly how things went with everything, but for the most part, they were an interesting team that you were right. They were looking for multiple projects to build their own company with. We were just one, but from our perspective, we thought we were the most important one. And I do think they were trying to give us maybe guidance that maybe we weren't quite listening to, because one thing that I always go back to as like the shoulda, coulda, woulda of the era and of Buda Next Three Exits is, and this is a question we should both try to ponder on, is at the time, what could we have done to introduce the characters to grow our audience before making the pilot?
Is that a question for me, or is that rhetorical?
I think it's a question for both. I think it's a question for both of us.
That's an interesting question, in part because 2005 was a very different era. I mean, I think Facebook was still behind the college email address wall. Like, there were definitely, you couldn't get on to Facebook. I mean, I remember when high schoolers started getting on Facebook and everyone got up in arms, right? Kind of the way that, Gen Z got up in arms when anyone over the age of, I don't know, 23 started getting on TikTok.
It's their public-private space. They want to keep it for themselves, but they have no way of keeping others out.
It's a good question, Joel. I mean, I'm really interested in hearing your answer to this, because I don't know in that era how I would have approached doing anything grassroots that could have built the kind of audience that would have, because it's not just building an audience, right? Like, one, there was no place to congregate digitally online to gather people. And then two, everything was at that time still about broadcast, and internet videos were like barely a thing at that point. I mean, there were internet videos, but the idea that you could have a successful career doing things on the internet was still a glimmer in a lot of people's eyes. I'm not even sure YouTube was out at that point.
YouTube was definitely out, but we're talking infant YouTube, like YouTube that most people probably just thought it was a cool way to try to watch TV shows if they could, flip the image so that whatever rudimentary algorithms were like searching for copyrighted content wouldn't find it. This was YouTube before the before the prank channel, before, video essays, for sure, before the video essay, before the video podcast, or maybe right at the dawn of the video podcast. I mean, the YouTube we should have been using, but we wouldn't have used it for this purpose, because we were always aspiring for, I think we were always holding ourselves to the cinematic like quality. And at the time, at the era, we still couldn't walk into a store today. And maybe in the past 5 years, I feel confidently you could walk into a store, and if you had a few grand to drop, you could buy a camera that, with the right lighting and the right other equipment to back it up, you could buy a camera that could get you like cinematic quality. You could shoot a short film with a camera you bought off the counter. We were almost there near the end of our, run as like thinking of ourselves as filmmakers, but not at the beginning. At the beginning, even we knew that you couldn't just make this on your own. You needed to get, professional grade equipment. I guess I'm of two minds of what we could have done to get our characters out there. Maybe we could have done both. Maybe we could have done one. Ultimately, we did neither. I was a big fan of webcomics at the time, and while there wasn't necessarily the best place for people to congregate online, I think Reddit was just around the corner, and that could have like really inspired us. But I think if we could have found somebody to help us, I was trying to illustrate at the time, and I think I was okay, but I still wasn't. I don't know. I don't know if we had what we needed at the moment at that time to do a solid web comic, but I think the characters would have really flourished in that. And I think, ultimately it was probably one of our foibles that we kept pushing Buda Next 3 Exits as a live action series. We probably should have been trying to get it as an animated series. And that would have, if we had introduced the characters in webcomic format, we could have worked on their designs. We could have worked on the world building. We could have done a lot of work for cheap that could just immediately be translated to an animated series. A lot of great animated series came from comics, like the Boondocks, for example. The Simpsons, and on a technicality, kind of The Simpsons, Matt Groening started out as a comic book writer. He didn't sell his comic book Life in Hell as the show, but I mean, he got the meeting to sell The Simpsons, or to pitch The Simpsons based off of his work on Life in Hell. For better or worse, Dilbert is an example. Baby Blues is an example. There's a long list of comics turned animated TV shows. So I really think, and who knows what audience, or maybe we could have made a graphic novel if when everything else failed. Maybe we could have turned our scripts into graphic novels and sold them to our audience who was looking at the webcomic, if we built an audience. So webcomic was the first one that comes to mind. It was definitely the heyday of the webcomic back then. Now a webcomic is almost expected to be almost single panel. Used to back in my day, webcomics were 3 panels. You had the setup, and then the well, it wasn't the punchline. What is it called? It's your setup, you have your twist, and then your punchline.
The middle
whatever
panel.
the middle panel is. Yeah.
Twist. Yeah, the middle panel. That's the filler panel, right?
I guess so. It depends on what kind of story you're telling. If you're telling a joke, it's a twist panel, I think. And if you're telling a Spider-Man, a dramatic comic, that's where all the story happens. You know how those Spider-Man comics used to work in the comic strips? They're 3 panels. Panel 1, recap of what happened last time. Panel 2, something new happened this time. Panel 3, a cliffhanger that ultimately will be recapped in panel 1 of the next issue. So really, panel 1 and 3 are retreads every single time. It's only the middle panel that pushes the story forward.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we aren't working with panels. That sounds awful, but I'm sure there's a way to make it less awful. I think you did have one more of these, though, right?
The second one would have been the classic of the era: make a short film. We could have, it might not have, if we were going the live action route, getting finding people to play the boys. We already had an adult man to play one of the characters who could have stayed on if we had to switch out the boys. I'm sure we could have.
Who?
Josh.
Oh, I was thrown by you calling him an adult man.
You know what I'm saying.
I've never thought of Josh as an adult man. I've always just thought of him as a Josh.
I understand, Josh. But we could have made a scenario, a 10-minute scenario, filmed it. Got the money together to film it with higher quality production. Use it as a proof of concept. Submit it to film festivals and see if we got any traction.
You've lost an incredible amount of weight since that time. Because I remember we did do those short. Remember those photographs? We did a photograph, and you played Phil, and Josh played Brian, and he was measuring your stomach and feeding you hamburgers and things.
I do remember that.
Yeah, it was interesting. You were you had a gun for some reason.
Well, the plot line, if I remember correctly, was Phil Cash, and this is a great example of what we were imagining Phil Cashdollar to get into. Phil Cashdollar hears that there's a communist plot, a communist agent in his community. So he starts training with his friend Brian in order to be, capable of taking down the communist threat. And then he ambushes the communist in a parking garage and shoots him dead and is the hero.
Yeah. So,
is that
obviously it sounds a little bit more like one of exploits than a good idea.
Well, I think that was always and that's the fun part that keeps, it's okay, how does influence Phil to do something crazy, and how does Simon, the other main character who is the Poindexter of the group, but the guy who keeps everything together as best as possible, how does he try to stop Phil, or how does he manage to turn Phil's crazy antics into actually being helpful?
I mean, Simon basically only Simon's success at the end of every episode was like mitigating 10 to 20% of the total chaos that Phil
Yeah.
created. It was never like a full blown fix. It was always just like, oh, this could have been worse.
Yeah, I mean, Phil was the loose cannon cop who plays by his rules, and Simon was the new rookie detective set to keep him on straight, on the straight and narrow, basically.
So tying this back though, for what we learned here. So there's two things that I kind of want to touch on, right? Like one is, we were doing something really grand, and especially at that time, where everything was broadcast dependent, the odds that we could influence that outcome ourselves was very, very limited. Even honestly, if you think about what the production company Reversal Films could have done for us, was extremely limited in the face of the studio system that was in place at that time and still relatively strong. So, the big lesson there is, if you want to be successful, you need to have more leverage over the outcome. And when we came to approaching X Seekers of Fortune, that's why, like, from the very beginning, we were just incrementally doing what we could. And it was just Joel and I, toiling away, for months by ourselves, because we could do that. We didn't need to rely on anyone else. And then incrementally starting to build and scale as we absolutely needed to, and finding the partners along the way that could help us. But at the end of the day, we chose an endeavor that we felt like we could actually execute ourselves. It wasn't dependent on the buy-in of a big corporation or, a bunch of people who had influence. It was something that we could do ourselves.
100%. I think that's a huge thing, and it's changed a lot in the era. Like, since we were younger folks to today, the idea. I think, like, the idea, if you were to talk to a young person today who wanted to get a media career, and unless they really wanted to get to the top of the heap, like they were looking to climb the hierarchy of Hollywood, I would be perplexed to hear them say that they wanted to go through the studio system with every outlet that they have today to make quality content on their own or with a small group of people. And I see it all the time, like great comedic sketches, like quick short films on TikTok, on YouTube, but more so like, and now, like, media is becoming so much more nuanced, like the type of shows that, was there anything on TV that you would compare to the modern day video essay, which has obviously taken a huge hold of people's attention? Like, I can listen, like, you don't have to watch them. You can mostly listen. Sometimes you miss some punchlines because it was a visual gag, but most of the information is, like, all said, so you can listen to it without having to watch. You can just keep it on in the background. You can watch intently, and you can make them on YouTube. You can make them as long as you want to, versus like the constraints of network TV. Talking earlier about how we turned in such long scripts, 41 pages was ridiculous. And I think maybe the people at Reversal Films might have gotten, part of the reason they might have gotten cold feet is we were coming in with a comedy about kids, and then at some point we were like, yeah, and it probably needs to be an hour-long show. And especially based on the standards of the broadcast system, that wasn't going to fly.
Yeah, they're like 20-minute animated, and we're like 60-minute live action bear. They're like, no. Take your $1 and go. But actually, we're not going to give you the $1.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't honestly know what happened to that $1. I feel like it's out there somewhere.
Well, there's a $1 out there that has our name on it, not literally, figuratively, and it should come back to us. Well, let's make sure we keep the first $1 we make from X Seekers of Fortune. Have we made that yet?
No, we have not. But maybe by the time this airs.
Yeah, we have some plans cooking, but it would be, but you will probably already know about the plans we have cooking by the time you see this, because we would have already revealed them on a regular episode. So
more than likely,
I guess just to round out that, because I would suggest that Buda Next 3 Exits, I mean, it changed a lot in my life. I think to say it didn't would be a lie, because it was the catalyst that spurred me to make the move from San Antonio to Austin, Texas, to move, move up here to be with you at the time so we could do writing every day. So it got me disciplined enough to get money together, however I did, to change cities. So I think that was a huge change in my life. But at some point, this was like I was investing possibly too much into the show going somewhere and doing something for us, and it just spurted out, and we just stopped talking about it less. Like we started talking about it less and less and less, and other projects came up that you would get excited about. But I think I was always kind of like hoping that we would eventually get back to it for probably maybe a little bit longer than you did. Do you, I guess, like before we move on to like where we are today, do you just remember how how you felt leaving, like when you felt like you left Buda Next Three Exits behind, and how you feel about it today, and when you knew it was time to move on?
Well, I think at a certain point it seemed clear. I think Reversal Films maybe had broken up or something like that. That probably was part of it, because I forget exactly when that happened, but I think that they had a fracture. And then I think at that point it seemed clear, based on what was happening with them, that we weren't going to have their support. And, to remind everyone, I mean, this was happening when Joel and I were like 19 and 20. So you have to think about like all this decision making through the lens of a 19 and 20-year-old. And I mean, I would not do business with a 19 and 20-year-old at all, except for in a very specific, context as somebody in their 30s. At least not anything that was relying on them to do a lot, just because they lack perspective, and we definitely lack perspective. For me, hey, is that Yuki? I assume so. It's too big to be Winston.
Yeah, she's too big and too out of the way. So this is Yuki, and hopefully Yuki will just stay here.
Is she trying to do a mustard seed impression?
I don't know what she's trying to do. She just woke up and she's grumpy as hell, but she's now moving on to be in front of my computer. If you come into my lap, you can stick around, but if you she's giving me such.
Why do I feel like she's gonna claw you across the face real suddenly?
I don't know. Yeah. Anyway. I think we can continue on. I'll give her some attention. If she interrupts much more, though, I'll strike her from the set.
You need to use the word strike with a cat. You can just say, like, gently set her outside the door. Let's not give people the impression that you're too influenced by Genghis Khan. I think that for me, it was really that I just, sometimes with these things, it's like they kind of just recede into the back of your priorities. I think I was, I think you had just moved up there. I think my brother had just moved there. I think I had just started the relationship that would become my marriage. I think that I was in film school and starting to make, films for class, and, life just kind of started pulling in another direction, and it seemed like, Buda would have to go on ice. Like, I don't think I psychologically ever said we're not going to make Buda, and I think if you asked me to this day, I would say we're probably not, but I wouldn't ever give you the answer that we were completely not. I think it would be different doing it now. But like I always used to think of it as like a project that we would put in the drawer or on the shelf. And one day when we had the means to produce things, that we would produce them, if we were interested in it still. So yeah, I don't know that there was ever like a really clean, breaking point with me. I think it was just kind of like something that I felt like I paused and forgot about.
Yeah. Okay, Yuki. Sorry, I just have to get this mouse. I guess I'll put my mouse over here now, since she's decided the desk is hers. You can see how thin my iron fist is. It's like she's now done exactly what I asked her not to do, and she's.
I have a very thin
I have
fist.
a very soft iron fist. Where are we at time wise? Okay, yeah, we're doing okay on time. I would, because I do want to try to be somewhere by 7. Oh my goodness, the days just fly by, and that's I think what happened with. In some ways, like with my feelings towards Buda Next Three Exits is, the days keep going by and you stop talking about it every day, and you're not developing it further, and you're not like writing script pages. I think we sputtered out like either 4.5 or 5.5 scripts in. And these were serious scripts that we would write and rewrite and, work our way through and out, like, have outlining sessions and everything like that. We were like a two-man writer's room at that point. But I think it just, for me, I think the thing I realized that we weren't ready to be those people. I think you start to learn, like, and maybe this is what Reversal Films was trying to teach us and teach me, is like you start to learn that there's so much that goes into these film productions, into being what is now known as a showrunner, which was like kind of like a whispered about mythical, like, this is the real people behind, who make your TV. These are like the artors who make your TV back then, and now it's like a coveted position right next to film director, that the showrunner was. And it's like, if I knew back then what I know now, I would have been like, are you crazy? You're not going to be the showrunner of this show. If it's made, they're going to bring somebody in to, at best, mentor you. And that's assuming they don't just kick you out the door and take over the project.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way any studio would have been like, oh, a couple 19-year-olds. Yeah, we'll give them a few $1 million to make a TV show. That'll turn out well. 0%.
Yeah. So, well, I guess that's where we left it. And I love the idea that you still think it could be in our, okay, Yuki, it could still be in our desk drawer, ready to be pulled out, dusted off, and like kind of revisited. So I think, just to round things out, people have a general idea of what Buda Next 3 Exits is. It's essentially about, three.
You have a cat ear.
Okay, I'm going to have to like let her out. We'll pick back up with this question though. Okay. She's just looking into the light. So I really appreciate your idea, and I do believe it in some ways to be true, that Buda Next 3 Exits is sitting in a drawer somewhere, literally at your house. It seems you pulled out one script. I'm sure you have a couple others around, and it's ready to be pulled out, dusted off, and given another look over by us. I guess just to update things, or to talk about like where we would go with it if we got an opportunity to make it in some fashion. We wrote it back in 2005, and we kind of touched on the fact that we wouldn't even be confident, blind reading the script out loud in front of people. So what type of changes do you think we might have to make it for the 2024? I mean, like, let's be honest, if we really made this, it might be 2030, if it got made. So is there any changes off the top of your head that you would make to the story?
Yeah, but most of them I don't feel comfortable talking about on the podcast.
Well, I have a couple of changes that I would make to the story. You want to hear?
Yeah. Tell us. Yeah.
Okay. Back in 2005, the idea of an influencer hadn't really been developed. And if you talk, from what I understand, if you talk to a lot of kids these days, at least for a little while, their ideal job was YouTuber. I'm sure it might have clicked over to TikToker, but the idea that you could create your own media career on your phone in your backyard is humongous these days. And kids back then, I'm sure we had a scene where Phil Cashdollar used a camcorder to do like some backyard wrestling or something like that, and that was an early version of going viral. But now it is like an actual pathway to career. And our characters, I think the thing that united at least two of our characters was that they were kind of poor kids, but poor kids these days do have access to these means to get noticed and attention. So I think I would have written it as, I think I've pitched this to you before, Phil, Simon, and the older one, who's like in his early 20s or mid 20s, would be in aspiring social media influencers of some variety. I think they all have different goals, but they are the only three people in this town trying to do that thing. And so they help each other. Phil is doing like, prank shows or prank style podcasts, or like or dare style videos for YouTube and TikTok. Simon holds the camera for our camera foreman. Simon, like make sure that it's as safe as possible. He's lookout, doing his like, long form music reviews. Phil and Simon are there helping him set up lights. Simon is doing his like man on the street reaction, getting reactions to the topic of the day. Phil's there like getting people to sign the consent forms and whatnot. That they work. I would have them operate as a team. Then you would see them helping each other create this content, these videos, and that would always give them a reason to be in the middle of something because they're trying to get a video made, or because of the video they're trying to make, they're drawn to an attraction. Like, Simon might have a more political, journalistic approach to what he's doing, so he's constantly trying to get into the bad situations that are happening around town to learn what the story is.
Yeah, no, I think that would be cool. There's a lot of ways you can take that influencer, tropes and have fun and get in the middle. I mean, honestly, most influencers, most YouTubers kind of seem like the kids in not X Seekers of Fortune, Buda and X3X. It's like, I feel like when I listen to interviews or, behind the scenes of people making YouTube videos, especially early on, it's like, yeah, we snuck into this insane asylum and then we got like stopped in the streets by a helicopter and a bunch of police officers because we were dressed in black and had backpacks and we were too close to a school, and like things just get out of hand real crazy. So I think it would have been a perfect fit for the
Yeah,
boys.
exactly. And they would always have a reason to be doing something and have a reason to be stopped by the cops, but also have an alibi, so that they could, not that they would get out of every situation in a small town Texas. You try to get away with that in a small town. I think, but it would be like they would have at least, they would be able to have relationships with almost every adult in town because all the adults would know that those are the kids with the cameras who are getting in the way. Yeah.
Nice.
So now Buda Next 3 Exits didn't work, but we believe today that we've learned that persistence equates to inevitability, and we are at the very least persistent people when it comes to trying to make a big major project like X Seekers of Fortune, like Buda Next 3 Exits. So, just maybe to set the stage for a future episode like this, what do you remember as being the next thing you moved on to after Buda sort of failed to materialize?
Yeah, just kind of what I said before. Life. I mean, school, short films. I was in film school at UT at that time. I made my first films, black and white, silent films, that I was trying to just kind of understand filmmaking, just experimental stuff, making relationships with folks like William. Honestly, it probably all melded together because when I really think about it, I think that Buda was still somewhat active in 2007. So I don't really know when the plug was pulled on it exactly, but I don't know what I moved on in terms of a specific project. Nothing huge in my mind. What about for you?
Well, that was a very because you definitely had much more of an in to filmmaking stuff. And you're also much more of a social person, a social butterfly who's constantly meeting new people. You might not believe it, but I do think like you're really good at making new relationships and kind of finding new things to work on. And I'm much more of like toiling away at my solo in my home, so I don't tend to always know like what is going to be my next project that I'm working with on somebody else. And I would say that what I recall, what I think I remember most clearly and vividly is shortly after Buda failed to materialize and we were sort of still in that in-between space, you started working with Nick and Josh Holden much more regularly, and that will definitely lead us to our next foibles down the line. But
yeah, a lot of foibles.
I mean, I really have a hard time pinpointing like what exactly was my next film project. I think I was a little bit burnt out on it. I think I started thinking maybe I should try doing comic books, since that was such a big consideration at the time that Buda could have succeeded as a comic. So I started like trying to develop stories and ideas. And I had a few, but I think we stopped working less directly with each other, and I was trying to build something on my own and not realizing that you were the catalyst. Like, I think, like an engine turning over, it takes both of us. Like one of us is the engine block and one of us is the gasoline. And it's, use that metaphor, like the metaphor could change day to day or idea to idea, but like one of us does something that causes the explosion, the explosion in the other person. And that is what gets us going. And so I think like when I'm working alone, it would take me what I could get done with you in like 2 months would probably take me a year. You know.
Mm. It's one of the things when I look back at it that I think, I bugs me the most about that era is I feel like I was too uncompromising. Like I feel like there was just way too many times where I like felt like it had to go the way that I wanted it to go. And, as we like reapproach partnership later in life here, right? Like talking about the difference between our late 30s and our early
Hmm.
20s, one of the things that I've been very cognizant of is really trying to make sure that, I don't fall into trying to be, you know, um, too controlling of things, right? Like that was something I felt like when I reflect on how I was during that period of time, I felt like, I had such a strong desire to execute on what I saw as my vision that, I think the project was worse for it, right? Like I think I hadn't learned really how to truly play well with others. I mean, I felt like, I liked collaborating with other people and I enjoyed it, but I hadn't quite figured out how to be a good partner yet.
I think that is like learning the process of learning from being a young man to what's the best word for it? It's not that we're old men, but we're men and or grown-ups at the very least. That's like I think you really learn to check your ego at the door, and I think we're much better about uh because I mean I have that a little bit of that too, and I think we're getting better about calling each other out when things it's like, okay, yeah, you want it to be perfect, but it's not going to be perfect, so we might as well, what do we need to do to get it to what we talked about in the past, minimum viable product. And it's like now that we're old enough to know that you only capture perfect every now and then along the way, and every other time that you don't capture perfect, you just need to make sure you get it well enough for it to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that really helps us get to that point or helped me get to that point is, I mean, you see how hard it is to be successful, and this ties into persistence,
Hmm.
right? Like, we've done so many things together over the 20 years that we've been friends. And, we use this metaphor often when we're talking about, landing a plane or getting a plane off the ground. You know, we really didn't feel like we ever got a plane off the ground until Next Seekers of Fortune. And now it's less about getting the plane off the ground and more about getting the plane to land in a new place, um, with all the people still on board. And it, it's not the kind of thing that we would have. I don't think we would have the mentality, or I wouldn't have the mentality I have today if I hadn't gone through the setbacks and sort of like the let's call them like momentary failures. I don't really look at them as failures in the grand scope of things, but those moments where your expectations get dashed, things don't work out the way you want them to, right? Everyone has the highest hopes, when they embark on a new adventure that, they're going to make a movie that's going to, resonate with people and get seen, and it's going to launch a career, or they're going to write a great comic book or whatever it is. And sometimes when those things putter out and you know, don't turn out the way that you want them to, it's very easy to, sort of self-identify with that outcome and say, I'm a failure. I'm not capable of doing this. But if you stick with it, if you're persistent, if you believe in yourself and you look for the lessons along the way, you may get to a point where things just start working because the accumulated knowledge and experience actually amounts to something that makes for success. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I hope we are. But, I've seen a lot of planes crash.
I haven't had the unfortunate, terrifying, blessings of seeing a plane crash myself, but I know what you
I
mean.
should say that was not a literal
Yeah.
statement. I have not been misfortunate enough, or
No. Yeah.
unfortunate, to see the
Yeah.
misfortune
Unfortunate.
of many in-person plane
Yeah.
crashes. Or
Not a sight I've ever seen. I think that would be next level terrifying for me. Knowing that I'm going to be traveling on a lot more planes soon, I am avoiding the thought at all. Um, no, I think that's yeah, there was a lot there, and I do believe that you are correct. We had, I would say there might be one plane one or two planes that we landed in our filmmaking careers, but they weren't big ones. They were like personal, like small engine planes, and the landing wasn't particularly spectacular, So
Yeah.
I think this is much more.
We'll get to a couple of
Yeah,
those, I'm
this
sure.
this one, I mean, it feels like we're building up more towards like a a Boeing 747 landing, but because we are picking up passengers along the way, and we can definitely get more into that here in the next few episodes because our fan base is seemingly just trickling in, and we're just waiting for that trickling, but we're waiting for that point where that trickle turns into a flood. So I guess to round out the conversation about this, the big thing that tied Buda Next 3 Exits to X Seekers of Fortune in our mind, that was the amount of lore that we have going on. So I have two questions about that. First of all, why is it that whenever we put our heads together, we eventually end up with this complex lore and vivid character? I know we touched a little bit on this before, but do you have any other ideas why it may be less about like our influences and more about like what causes us to keep refining and growing, and like we're almost like farmers out there planting seeds?
Honestly, and this is interesting because when you start working with other people, when they give you feedback, oftentimes you get to see yourself through the eyes of others, and it informs you a little bit more about what might be different about you than the general population. And I think one thing that maybe is, I'm not saying that we're super special in some way, but maybe we're, statistically outside of the, the normal distribution on imagination. I mean, I'm not going to say everything that we imagine is good, but I think both of us have enormous imaginations. And I think, like you said, we kind of feed off of each other. Like we have a creative chemistry that I think is pretty powerful. And so, I think if you have two people who like building worlds and have an inclination towards it and big imaginations and sort of this sort of like, like you said, like they come together to form that engine block and that gasoline, and it just starts going. Like I think it almost starts to feel inevitable that we're going to end up building out something more complex than just. And we didn't set out to tell a giant story with X.
In fact, if anything, I was trying to put my foot down and say, let's try to keep it simple. I think my initial pitch was to tell like 4 different, short stories set in different locations and just depict them on the cards that way. And then we could release like 4 mini comics or something like that, as but no, it's more and more leaning towards, I mean, we just had a meeting with somebody to help us with the design, like the card templating and the typography, to give us like her 2 cents. And she did a great job of explaining like, a different way of approaching it, because I know enough about type to know I don't know enough about typography. But that aside, when she asked, how would you describe your story? I was like, I guess it's Indiana Jones meets Lord of the Rings. And when I thought about that, I was like, what have I set myself up for?
That was funny too, because like when you said that, I was just like, oh, I guess that's what we're doing. Like I didn't. I was like, we didn't talk about that, Joel, but I can't disagree with you.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, and that also that right there raises my final question of today's podcast, which was, these things aren't necessarily needed for a card game. They've been done before in a card game, but they're not needed. A card game can be like very sporadic and very much like just like a montage of images versus like a linear story. And it's not like we can tell an entire story in the card game. So how are we planning on telling the story of X Seekers of Fortune?
Yeah, so I mean, it is a 2-prong approach, right? So we are going to write a graphic novel eventually. Partner with a writer, and we'll help with the story. We probably can't actually write the pages ourselves, not all of them, and also through the cards. And then who knows? Maybe one day there'll be more ways that we share the story with the world. I mean, we love cinematic storytelling in all its forms. And so if we had an opportunity to do that, it would be very attractive to do it. I think, though, one of the things that is going to make X Seekers of Fortune special, and maybe, I'm not going to say no one else out there is doing this, because I think there are definitely other people who share our passion for storytelling. But our aim is to really make story as fundamental to the gameplay experience as the mechanics, meaning that the mechanics and the story are so intertwined that when you're playing the game, you feel like you're playing through the story. And we hope that all the years and work that we've put into learning to be storytellers could combine with what we're learning about being game designers and really allow us to tell stories through games. And yeah, hopefully that's a plan we can land.
I think so, and yeah, that is what I'm most excited for. While we're talking through the art of the cards, like I said, setting up the scenes that we can tell through a graphic novel to start with would be very fun, very amazing. Breaking news, Fortune Seekers. X Seekers of Fortune now has its pre-launch page live on Kickstarter. Click the link in the description below so you can be one of the first people to support X Seekers of Fortune. Also, there's probably going to be some bonuses if you support within the first 24 hours, so be on the lookout for those announcements coming soon. Thank you so much, Fortune Seekers. Please support the game, support the show by liking this episode and subscribing to our podcast. And you know what? Support each other. Back to the show. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. I think we've kind of really established at least the kernel of the idea of Buda Next 3 Exits into the minds of our audience. But why don't we put kernels of other ideas into the minds of our audience with this week's Game of the Week?
So I feel like you sniped me a little bit on the Game of the Week with your question of the week, asking about the M&Ms. Was it M&Ms you were asking me about? What was the question?
Oh, I asked what emergency would have caused us to not be able to record an episode this week. And the winner, or the person who got closest to the reality, got $100.
Perfect. So in this game, it's called Aged Like Milk. It's also a game of predictions. I've got a few different things I would like you to weigh in on. And for everyone you answer or don't answer, you pay me $100.
Wait, so, what? If I answer it or if I don't answer it, I'm paying you $100.
Both.
Either. Yeah, I got the either part. It's the paying you $100. What, for the pleasure of answering your questions?
No, to help me recover that $700 billion I lost.
Okay. Well, I can just do my little bit. I'm not much. I need to open my heart to charity. So why don't we go ahead and get into it?
And as always, we'll rate this at the end as would play again or not. Although this is more a game of predictions, so I don't know if that would apply.
Okay, well let's go. I've been called a Nostradamus a few times myself.
By no one. Oh, okay. By yourself. Is that what you said?
Maybe myself.
Okay. Well,
I'll say this. I've had a few predictions in my past.
That does not connotate a accurate prediction. That's just a prediction.
Correct.
Okay. Well, here we go. Some of these are a little bit more mild than others, but we'll see. First one, when will this episode air?
If I were to use my podcast brain as a consumer of podcasts and just media in general, I believe this episode will either air near the end of December or the beginning of January, as the holidays will just rack us and we'll have to miss a week. Probably, I'm going to guess, like both Thanksgiving week and Christmas week, but we will have double batched an episode before. So we'll have an episode for like Christmas week, but not for Thanksgiving week.
Well, this isn't on my list of questions to ask, but you just inspired me, so I'll ask it. What will be your favorite Christmas gift this year?
This is going to sound corny, and I think it's a bit premature. My favorite Christmas gift to give would be like advanced prototype decks of my game to all of my family and friends.
No,
but the gifts you give are really the presents that you receive. But
the real gift you receive,
at this point, with like how the recordings have been going, a new computer of some sort, I guess, which is not going to happen.
Okay. Should
it be realistic?
I mean, I mean, you have to pay me double for everything that's really wrong.
Wait, I'm predicting my gifts. I'm going to say, if my parents have been paying attention to my social media feeds and what I'm doing, I would really appreciate them getting me a nice hat. But to take me to a nice hat shop and like let me pick it out and purchase it for me.
Something with a big flamboyant feather?
I'm starting to think a feather is going to be part of my hat.
Nice. Okay, here's the
Okay.
next one. When will the first unit of the first edition of X Seekers of Fortune be sold?
Sold or handed to somebody?
Let's say sold outside of the Kickstarter.
Oh, outside. If you're saying outside of the Kickstarter, I'm going to say August of 2024.
Okay. What will be the worst thing that will happen to you between now and the airing of this episode?
Diarrhea.
Ooh, okay. That's not the worst thing that could happen.
I'm setting my.
I mean,
I'm really hoping that nothing bad happens to me.
I feel like that's a reasonable thing to hope.
Yeah.
What will be the worst stunt you get talked into doing for the game?
The worst thing I get talked into doing for the game would probably be that's a good question. For me, going on a long tour around the world to create a docu series of me introducing the game to other cultures and people. Now, I say that you think that for a lot of people out there, that sounds amazing. I'm sure. I am not one who likes to live out of suitcases. I'm not one who likes to be away from home for too long. And I'm imagining the kind of tour where it's like where I'm going from city to city to city and not going back home between to recharge myself. So I feel like at some point I'm going to go on a long tour, maybe with you, maybe solo, representing the game in many different markets. And I have a feeling that's going to be a bit on the grueling side, but also I'm probably going to end up agreeing to like letting people film me doing it. And then we're going to have a document of me being miserable on the road. And if that's funny or tragic and sad, I don't know.
Hopefully both.
Yeah.
All right, here's your last one. This one's a softball. Why won't you have all your fingers?
Why won't I what?
Have all your
Why
fingers.
won't I have all my fingers?
Correct.
I'm sorry. I just need to let you know. For some reason, my headphone is like getting worse and worse as the conversation has gone on. So that's why I'm having you repeat. Okay. So why won't I have all my fingers? I mean, I've had quite a few. I mean, I think like anybody who's like gets to adulthood and hasn't learned proper like knife etiquette, in a kitchen, you've had your close calls, and and then you just multiply that by like, well, who knows what happens in a car accident, or if you were unfortunate enough to get into one. But why wouldn't I have all my fingers? I think I'm very trusting of animals in general, and I think I have a druidic tendency to make them feel calm and peaceful around me. And I feel like eventually I'm going to really read it wrong one time, where I reach down to pet something with sharp teeth and they are not having it, and they snap at me, and all of a sudden I'm coming up like this, which...
You think you're going to lose some fingers trying to pet an animal because you misread the situation? What animal are you petting that can bite 3 fingers off?
I feel like if I were to lose my fingers, any of my fingers, first and foremost, the way it's going to happen is because I try to pet something I shouldn't have tried petting.
Why would you be so happy to have lost your fingers?
Was that part of the question? Remember, I couldn't hear everything.
Yeah. This is a prediction game. You have to predict why you're so happy that you lost your fingers.
So this is a follow-up question. Well, I think that it was I think that it was a really cute animal that even after I lost my fingers, I managed to then, calm the animal and get into some Zen state. I didn't just rage out and shout out the devil, turn into a ball of rage and was unconsolable. I think I lost my fingers. I'm like, okay, that sucked, but I want to try petting again.
What animal are you petting that can take your fingers off and is also described as cute?
I just imagine like there's dogs out there, I'm sure, that could get a finger or two, right?
Yeah. So you're saying that you would get your fingers bit off by a dog and then you would continue to try to pet it until you could get it into a Zen state?
Yes. I think that could possibly be a future for me. In the future where I've lost fingers, that could have happened.
Okay. Well, that's about all we have.
Okay.
All we can hope is that you have most of your fingers when we air this podcast.
Yeah, I guess that's fairly evergreen material right there, because we didn't have, I mean, even though like elections are heating up, we didn't like try to do any predictions on those, but probably for the best, because that's probably less predictable than how many fingers I'll have by the time this episode airs. Well, I had a great time, and I hope y'all had a great time talking about this. And if y'all have more questions about Buda Next 3 Exits and our plans for where we're taking the story and lore of X Seekers of Fortune, you can ask all those questions to us. If you want to reach out to us through social media, you can find us at TikTok at Moth Studios. Instagram is X_Seekers_of_Fortune. Facebook, it's just X Seekers of Fortune, the way it would be spelled on the box. And if you'd like to, you can play a beta version of our game right now today by going to our, it would be best for you to go to our Discord first. That way you can meet up with people who have played the game before, and they can show you the ropes on Tabletopia. Tabletopia is a great little app that you can play in browser in order to play tabletop games, and our game is set up there for demo trials. With all that said, Danny, is there anything you'd like to add before we go?
No, I hope that this episode finds people well in the future, and can't wait to drive my flying car.
Wouldn't you be flying your flying car?
No, I'm going to drive it. I don't think I'd take that thing off the ground.
All right. Well, with that, I have been Joel, reminding you that you must start somewhere, so why not here? Thanks for listening. Theme music by James Hilden, produced and edited by William Wyman.
I think I'm supposed to say something that he can put at the end of the thing, so this is the thing.